My friends, if ever there was a process that epitomized my saying, it's simple, but it's complicated, making all of this binding fit that exactly. Because, you know, anybody could have done it. I mean, it is simple from the standpoint that it doesn't take a lot of brains to glue a bunch of pieces together. But it's also incredibly complicated because everything wants to stick to everything. Nothing wants to cooperate. You know, the papers don't lay where they're supposed to when you get the glue on everything because it sticks a little bit and it pulls the paper. And, you know, all the different little mechanisms you needed and the clamping you needed to pull it all together and get it all squished flat and tight and etc. It was simple, but it was complicated. People think I say these things just to be silly, but on the other hand, and I do to some degree, but on the other hand, there's a lot of truth to it. But the good news is, we prevailed. It was really tough, I gotta be honest. And getting it apart wasn't as easy as you might think. I mean, even though we washed all the glue off as best we could, that just little fine glue in the water residue was just enough to stick it together pretty tightly. It was a little more complicated getting them apart than you might have suspected. However, we did it. It just took a little bit of finesse and a little bit of time. So I ended up with 4 body pieces, and try to give you a close-up if the camera can focus on that. And they really turned out very nice. I'm really happy with them. I mean, you got that curly maple, and again, if you can see that, the bottom piece there is much thicker than this top piece of white on the edge. So the thin edge will go against the body, and the thicker edge will go out. And anyway, so there's 4 of those, and they turned out really, really nice. Then we had 3 of the ones that are going to go around the neck and the peg head. And now this has a little smaller stripe down here, so we just didn't have enough to do it all. But on the other hand, it doesn't have to match perfectly. I mean, it's still the same kind of wood and the same kind of striping, and so it's going to match. It's just that it doesn't match exactly. Anyway, and then so I thin these down a little bit more. These first ones for the body, I've got them at 95 thousandths right now, and these for the fretboard and peg head, they're at 75 thousandths. There's a chance I'll take these down to 60 thousandths yet, because bending it around the tight peg head and things like that is pretty hard to do. So I may take these down a little bit more yet, but I can always do that. I did that all off camera on my little thickness sander that you've seen many, many times. So the only other thing that that I still need to address is on the, you know, I guess as I got faster at it, I did the body ones first, and then the last 3 were the peg head and the neck fretboard binding. And they stuck together a lot more, and perhaps just because I was going faster and got a little sloppier and that sort of thing. But I will have to clean up these, and I'm using my little finger plane to clean some of the glue right off the very edges where they stuck together. And believe it or not, this little finger plane does a pretty nice job if you take your time. You could probably use files and sandpaper and things like that too, but this knocks off the big chunks of wood and things that kind of got stuck together, especially where it was stuck up against that other hardboard that was pushing them together, that little L shape. That last piece stuck to that pretty badly, and so I can clean all of those fragments off with this. And matter of fact, most of those fragments are on this piece right here. And if you just take your time with the little finger plane, you can really do a nice job. You can just feel it peeling those little fragments right off. And then I'll sand it, of course. But I'll have to, like, I don't know if you can see it, but right there's a little spot of that wood, and I can just take it right off with this. No problem at all. It's a little thicker there than I thought it was. I think I got it all, just about all. But it takes it right off of there. And you can, be very accurate and not take off what you don't want to take off. In other words, you don't want to take off the actual binding itself. But again, you got to be used to using a finger plane to do it that accurately. But if there's one thing I feel like I know how to use, it's a finger plane. So anyway, that looks pretty darn good. Now, the one place right here it chipped a little bit, so I'm going to glue that back together. But other than that, one little spot, and probably won't even have to use that because I think we got more of this than we need. But anyway, I'll glue that back together just in case we need it. I am pretty happy with the way it turned out otherwise. And thanks to my wonderful viewer that sent me these 3D printed things, and one of them was a sander, and that's just like the perfect size and shape to hold it, you know, hold the sandpaper flat to sand the edges of this binding all flat. Just really nice. Works really good for this. Just the perfect size and shape. If you're wondering who sent these, it was covered in a previous shop talk, and honestly I can't keep all the names straight, so I can't tell you right now. You'd have to go to the shop talk to find out. Well, my friends, as I mentioned before, the binding turned out very nice on this. I'm very happy with it. Now it's just figuring out how to go about doing what I want to do here. My idea is to put a piece of this binding here. See, because this slot is wider than normal. And what I was thinking of doing is putting a piece of binding, returning it here, and then 45ing it across this way so that it would come across like so. But, you know, it would meet at a 45 if you can picture that. And with this, you probably can't picture that all that well. But anyway, these joints would all be 45'd. And in the same way down here. And of course, the same way on this other side. So, just trying to get it where I can hold it there. That will still leave a little gap here in the middle, and then I'm thinking of filling that with some more wood, and probably a piece of this wood that we went around here with, and filling this gap with that, and which is a slightly different color, which is okay. You know, that'll kind of tie it all together. And but the first thing I'm going to have to do is straighten out this gap, because this is just rough wood laid there. It's not perfectly straight, perfectly square, all of that. So I've got to do all that first, which will open this gap up just a little bit more, and you know, might even complicate things, or it might make it simpler. I really don't know. It's just, you take it one step at a time and figure it out as you go, and that's what I'm trying to do here. The real tricky thing about this is I have to remember that this is going this way and 45 and into this piece, you know, and how to cut all of that, and how to cut the slot here at the top so that I don't get too deep in here, and you know, there's just a lot more to it. This is not simple and complicated. This is just plain complicated, period. But I'll get it all figured out and set up a good plan of attack, and I'll show you how I approach it. Okay, the next issue I have to deal with, after beyond what I just showed you, is I have to make sure that this cut is perfectly square to the top, and on this side it is pretty close. But the bad news is this is the center line, and this is that way almost 10 millimeters more than this side is. So in other words, this side needs to move that way 10 millimeters. That's a ½ an inch, you know, or close to it. Man, that's ugly. That's real ugly. And see, the problem with this is where it gets complicated is, well, it's complicated all the way through, but where it's exceptionally complicated is trying to match these things up again. If these two were together in the center here, like this, then 45 in them each way is no problem because, you know, it won't change anything at the top up here. But with a gap in these, what do you do at the top up here? Because this binding doesn't go straight through then. Yeah, it's that kind of problem. And, you know, the only other way I know to fix that is to just block cut it and you're not 45 in it, which wouldn't look very nice, at least not to my opinion. So, I mean, like I could just go straight through with the top binding and then just block these up to it and fill in between it, but it just doesn't look as neat as what I had planned, which would be 45 in these and bringing it around. So, and actually that's should be this way. I had it turned wrong. But anyway, that's my dilemma. I gotta do some thinking on how I want to get out of this mess. I knew this was going to come back and bite me some point in time. I was just trying to ignore it. You know, whenever you're using wood that's way too short for what you need, you should expect you're going to have trouble. And I knew I would eventually. I just have to figure out a creative way to get out of it. And I haven't figured that out yet. Okay, the first thing I've decided I have to do is I have to square up this side here. This side is the side that's furthest away from the center line. But even, you know, and I can't bring it any closer. But I do have to have it square. Once I get it square, then I have to make this other side match. And then I'll just have to fill in whatever has to be filled in. That's the only way I know to do it. That part is just a black and white given as far as I can see. The rest of it is going to require a lot of thought. So I'm going to start with the squaring up process here, and I'm not going to show that too much on camera because it's at too odd of an angle and this is too critical. So basically I'm just going to take a scalpel and cut down a straight line here and make that perfectly square and straight. But I'm going to do that mostly off camera, so just wanted to show you what I'm doing. I've kind of changed my mind and decided that I can probably show you some of this by just holding it down here the way I'm going to probably do this. And I'm just moving, and this is a good square, by the way. This is more expensive than just your average off-the-shelf hardware store square. It's pretty good, and really I'm trying to get it right on the very bleeding edge of where I need to cut. And I'm just going to start by just scoring it really lightly with this scalpel. And I'm trying, so in other words, I'm trying to remove the minimum amount of material that I can remove. You might be able to see the real fine line there that I've carved in that. Hopefully you can. Anyway, that's going to be tough to cut through all that. That rosewood's very hard, and you know, it's not real thick, but it's probably 70 thousandths thick or a little thicker. So a little more than a 1/16 of an inch. Thanks to our friend Chuck for sending us the scalpel blades. They're on something like this, they're really very, very good. On a lot of things I prefer to use the X-Acto because the X-Acto is a longer blade and I can stick it into places better. But for something like this, the scalpel blade's hard to beat. Partly because it's sharp and the point is very tough, very durable, where the X-Acto blade would break or chip on the end. This won't chip and break. That's a big plus when you're doing something like this. I think I've got that scored deep enough that I can attack it now with a chisel. There's my wife right on cue, out running the lawn tractor. Again, no complaints, otherwise I'd be out there running it. So I'm happy to let you all hear her cutting the grass. Yeah, that's really hard, and I don't know that I have it scored deep enough. I thought I did, but maybe I don't. I was hoping to just chip that right off, but not so much yet. So I'm going to work on that more off camera, and I'll bring you back when I figure out how I'm going to cut this other side. This other side is going to have to be cut way over here, quite a bit more. So this is going to be a really wide gap when we're done, which just adds to the trauma right now. I've scored this side as much as I can score it, and I've started chipping it out, and so far so good. It's working just about perfectly. I'm just trying to knock out little tiny little chips at one time. Not getting anxious. You know, I could go under here like that and get rambunctious, but I'm just trying to peel up just a little bit at a time and take my time with it, because you know, you only get one shot at these kinds of things, and you don't want to make a big mistake. If you make a little mistake, you might be able to fix it, but you make a big mistake and then you got trouble. That's not bad at all, considering. Now you can see how wide this is. It's a pretty darn wide gap. I'll show you how much wider it is now when I put those pieces back in here, once I clean out this last little bit here. Scoring it this way to make sure. And I'm also going to rescore it this way just to be sure. I do not want to have a mistake at this stage, since it's all working out pretty well. Alright, both of those are nice and square now, and now it's definitely centered in the top of the guitar just perfectly. So I will start filling this in here just to see how wide we're going to have how wide a gap we're going to end up with now. Now you can see it's going to be much wider. So we've got a lot to fill there now. But we can get real creative and decorative with that, I think. That'll be all right. In fact, I think I've already got the idea. I think we'll probably fill it almost exactly the same way we filled the 12th string with that little curly Q deal. I think that'll look really nice. And I know the particular person that we're building this for did like that detail, so I think that should be good too. Okay, well, I'll do some more cleanup off camera, and then I'll show you what my next step is. I've made a little filler strip. This is just a temporary filler strip to fill in this area here. And you might wonder why I would even think I need a temporary filler. Well, the reason is I'm going to try to route the binding slots around here, and with this dished in place, when you get to that spot, the router will jump down in there. So this will hold the router out even with the sides while I'm cutting these slots. Ask me how I know I need this. On the last guitar I made, it did just exactly that. Fortunately, that slot was much smaller and the damage was minor, and I was able to repair it without any significant issue. In fact, you couldn't tell it. But this one wouldn't be that way because it's so much bigger. And anyway, I learned a cheap lesson there, so I'm gonna block the problem off. I'm putting in two-way tape, just enough to hold this thing in place. And I'm hoping I can pry it back out of there when we're done cutting the slots. That's what I'm thinking, and I think it'll work. And of course, the thickness of the two-way tape made this stand up just a hair proud. And I could sand it a tiny bit more, but I think it'll be fine. If you know, I can always cut a little more off of here with a chisel if I need to in this area, and that's not a very big area, so if I need to shave a little bit there to make the binding work, I should be able to do that later. Having it proud is better than having it sunk in, because if it's sunk in, it will dig in deeper here to the top, and then you would see that on the top. So I'm good with that. I think it'll work just fine. Well, my friends, the procrastination is over with. I am now ready to route the binding slots in this guitar. One of the first things I've done is gone around and squared up the sides to the table. And you might wonder why you do that. Well, you know, you want the bit to be perfectly perpendicular to your sides all the way around. If, you know, to be quite honest, I had the front quite a bit sloped, and so that would have cut the angle just slightly on a slope. And this will cut the angle really square. So I've gone around and checked the sides, and everything's pretty darn square to the table now. So anyway, and I've locked down. You can adjust that with these little things here on the sides. You can raise and lower it. So it all seems to be pretty good. This thing floats up and down as you go higher and lower, so that should take care of the depth. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. This is always one of the scariest parts to me. Now, you have to keep in mind that the cutter is a real kind of rough blade. It's just a couple of paddles that cut really, you know, aggressively, and they're spinning this direction. So you have to keep that in mind when you're cutting these things. For instance, from here this way, I'm good because it's cutting this way with the grain. But when I get back here and I'm cutting this way, then the cutter is cutting directly into this end grain, and it's going to lift those and pull them out. So what I want to do there is start from here and go this way, and then it doesn't have as much opportunity to do that. It still can do it. But if you start here and you go this way, then that cutter grabbing in like this will grab that grain and just pull it right off. So it's really critical how you do this. Ask me how I know these things. Well, anyway, I guess it's time to do it, so here we go. The only thing I'm a little hesitant on is this thing keeps kind of moving on me here, and I think I've got it locked in as tight as I can get it though, so let's give it a shot, see what happens. Okay, it looks like it did a real nice job, and it cut it without any tear out. And the real critical thing is, does it look like it's right for the binding? And there we go. It looks beautiful. It just looks beautiful. Couldn't be happier with that. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the rest of that off camera. It's noisy and a long process. So I'll show you what it looks like when I get all that done. I'll be flipping this thing over and double checking the squareness again to cut the top as well. So I'll maybe show you a spot or two as I go through this, but otherwise I'm going to do most of it off camera. Well, that worked out really nice. I went all the way around it. I was very careful at every place where the grain peaks like this. You have to, be sure you're cutting the right way to keep from tearing it out. And I gave it a lot of forethought and made sure I didn't just do something, fast and screw up there. So it worked out really good. I don't see a problem at all with the way that cut that. Now I'm going to flip this over. Now the difference here is I'm going to have to re-level the sides because the back is sloped, and so we'll have to change it quite a bit to make this work. I imagine I'll have to raise these front ones up quite a bit. And we'll have to reposition them. So I'll get all that leveled up and then I'll show you the first little bit of cutting and stuff on this top. Okay, I've leveled everything here, and basically the top should pretty much be parallel to the table. And you know, then your sides should be square. I've gone ahead and checked all of that, and the sides are square, and the top is pretty darn level. It's not perfect, I'll just be honest, but generally when you're making something like this by hand and everything, it never will be completely perfect. But it's pretty close. The vacuum system is on right now. Someone else is using it, but I'm just going to route this and we'll fast forward through this and let you see the process. Well, there you have it. It appears to have done a real nice job again. Left a little bit of the fuzzies, which often happens on spruce. So there's a lot of fuzzies right around here that'll need to be carefully trimmed off. But other than that, it looks really nice. It looks like it did a great job. We'll move on and I'll show you the next step. Perhaps you can see the binding slots have been cut. In fact, you can see the kerf that's in there. And we're about to fill that back in with this real wood binding. So it should go on something like that, and this is all that curly maple. So we're gonna have to pre-bend all that. But before we get around to pre-bending the binding, I really need to go through and cut off all the little fuzzy wuzzies here. You can probably see them. I don't know how well that's showing up, but there's a lot of them. Whenever you cut a softwood like that, I mean, unless you really have a super sharp tool and unless there's something to back it, you're going to get those fuzzies pretty much all the time. So I'm going to I've got a brand new scalpel blade, and I'm just going to take my time and go around just like this all the way around this thing and get rid of all those little fuzzies without cutting anything else. And I don't know if you can see the difference there, but you can see a razor sharp edge right where my finger is, and up here it's fuzzy. So there's the difference, if that's showing up. I hope it is. Anyway, I'll do all that off camera and then I'll show you the next step. I've got all the little fuzzies cut off there. I thought I'd just point out some little minor thing here. You know, I put this filler strip in here so the router wouldn't fall in. Well, on this end it was pretty flush. On this end, to be honest, it's a little bit out. You know why? I don't know. A few thousandths. And of course that leaves a little bump right here in the binding. So, but that's good though. At least it's on the, you know, it's a bump that I can shave off rather than a hole that I'd have to try to fill. So it's not really hard to shave it off. I just take a sharp chisel and just kind of clean it up lightly. I think that'll do. I've been debating on whether I want to take this filler strip out now or wait. What I'm gonna do, see, is I'm going to return a 45 around this from that inner strip that's there. I'm gonna make it bend and come around like a picture frame. And you know, I don't know if it's better to leave this in there while I go straight across, or I don't think it's gonna make that much difference. So I have a feeling I'm just gonna go ahead and take that out. See if I can pry it out here. I think I just have two-way tape on it, so you know, just popped it right out. And if I really feel I need it, I can always put it back. And I'll clean all that two-way tape off there off camera too. Another little pro tip here, just so you know, this binding, you know, is all rough sawn. I don't know if it really doesn't show up that bad. Maybe you can see it a little better on this piece, but it's all rough sawn on one edge. You know, the edge with the little trim binding is smooth, but this edge is rough. So what I did was I took all this that I'm about to bend over to my belt sander and just ran it across the belt sander to smooth out that edge. And you might say, well, why is that even necessary? Because you're just bending this. Well, what happens sometimes, you know, this stuff's hard to bend. I'll tell you right now, this is curly maple, so it's really hard to bend. And if you got a little notch in this, it'll send a signal through that wood and cause it to crack and break there. So if you get it smooth, it's less likely to do that, even though it'll still want to break on you. This stuff is hard to bend. But let's go over to the bending table and see if we can get it done. We're over here at my homemade bender. It's a side bender is what it mostly is. You bend the sides of the guitar here. You can bend the sides of a mandolin here. And you can bend all kinds of little tiny little things up here. It's got 3 different tiers there that I made on it. Just, you know, to make it a little more flexible. This part here is computer controlled. If you want to know how I built this, there's a series of videos on it, and those videos are linked on my website. So you can go to my website, rosastringworks.com, and look at the tabs across the top, and you'll see something about the side bender. Anyway, it's almost up to temperature. I have it set for 430 degrees Fahrenheit, and it is 377 right now. That's enough to get started. It's not enough to get me where I want to be, but the one thing you need to know about this binding, by the way, is there's an inside and an outside. The outside is thicker walled. The inside has a thinner white wall. So that thin white wall needs to go to the edge of the guitar. This thicker is what will be seen on the outside. By wetting this down, you can start to see the curl in the wood already. So it's going to be beautiful binding once we get it on there. Now the trick is I have to start bending it. And you might say, well, how do I know where to bend it? Well, right now it doesn't make a whole lot of difference as long as I'm bending the narrow side. Keep the narrow side toward the bender. We're pretty good. So right now I'm just starting with just a general large curl bend. And in my mind, I'm starting at the back of the guitar, working to the front. That's what I'm doing. And it's sizzling already, and you can see that it's starting to take a little shape. But I'm working over here at the back of the guitar, and I'm going to work my way toward the front. So I've got a long ways to go yet. One of our wonderful viewer friends, Dr. Kelly, he's a retired doctor, and I think he's even retired from instrument work too. He did a lot of instrument work. Has made a number of suggestions that I add a wing onto this so I can sit like things like this right next to it. But honestly, I've decided not to pursue that idea. Rather than that, just put the work closer to me here on another table. That's the easier way to do it rather than adding something to this. And if you're wondering why I made that decision, well, adding a wing to this would just create the weight. It would also take some time, and you know, it increases the size. We're space challenged here, so anything that we can do to keep things smaller and more contained so they can be put away. And in addition, it just takes a lot of time that I don't have. And then, like I said, the weight too. This thing already weighs a ton. I went and bought the thick laminate here, the heavy like countertop laminate, and then with the base and all the other components and this heavy stuff in the middle, it's very heavy. So I didn't want to add any weight to it, for one thing. So I just set the work real close here on another table, and in this case the other table is my table saw. So, but that makes it convenient. I can just reach right here and see if it's, you know, working. And so far it's working. We're up to 408 degrees now, so We're getting close. To make this stuff bend better, and especially when you get into the tight bends, if you put a backing on it, like a piece of aluminum like this, it really does help it bend better. Oh, and then I just got a little rambunctious and pulled a little too hard, and I caused a crack right there. So I'm going to pause, fix that real quick, because if I fix it right now, you'll never see it. So I'm going to fix that with some CA glue, and we'll move on from there. Okay, repaired that, and you cannot see it. It has been repaired, and it really didn't need to bend that steep right there anyway, so I should be okay. I'm going to continue on like that never happened, even though it did. And I'm just going to take my time with this and not get so aggressive and not pull so hard. And see, if we had a bigger budget, I could narrate this and not do the, try to do the narration, the filming, and the actual work all in one take. But we don't have that kind of budget. It looks like it's getting flexible enough to bend around that now. And some people might say you need to soak it longer, but the problem with that is, keep in mind this is all glued together, so you don't want to soak this for hours or anything. Your glue would eventually come apart. So the way we're doing it is about the only way you can do this. I mean, you could put it in some sort of a press. That would be ideal if you had a press made that was exactly the right shape and just pressed it into place. That would be great. But guess what? We don't have that. With all the machinery and equipment and things I have now, I could probably make that though, and if I were just starting out in the career, I might actually make something like that. But as I'm at the other end of the spectrum, I'm not about to spend the time doing that. Well, this is going to be a long, boring process because I'm just going to be bending for a long time to get this to match. So I'll show you what it looks like when I get a little further along. Just for the record here, I'm on to my second piece. The first piece, I'll be honest, I broke it twice. I broke it once on the big curve and once on the small curve. And it's just a patience thing and getting back into the feel of this. You got to remember, I don't do this stuff every single day. And so it's kind of like you have to redevelop your feel over each time. And that's kind of where I'm at. It's been months since I've done this. Maybe longer than that, really. It's been a while. And see, it doesn't really hold the bend. You can bend it quite a bit, but it wants to straighten back out. So, it's just not that easy to do. And one little trick as you're doing this is if you listen to the sound whenever it stops steaming, then you're pretty much got your shape kind of set there. And then I go to the other side a lot of times and try to work it until it quits steaming, holding that shape. And your shape will stay better that way than it will any other way. It's not going to stay entirely, it's going to spring back, but it stays better. And so that's about as good as you can do with this kind of thing. So I'll keep working at that, and eventually I'll show you putting this on the guitar. I've got some tape that I'll stick that down and pull it over and stick it to the top. I like to alternate. The next one, I don't do this every time, but the next one I'm going to start on the top and pull it down. It just spreads that tension out that's in you know, when you're trying to stretch this to as tight as you can and get it without, before you break the tape. You want to pull this just as hard as you can pull it without breaking the tape. And so I switch back and forth, getting a little glue squeeze out, so I'm going to clean that up as I go. I'll put this one on the bottom down here and stick it on, and then pull it to the top. And I'm about out of where I've glued it here. I'll get one more piece on. I'll stick this one on the top and pull it down. And you really just want to make sure the tape is stuck well. Alright, and so you just go a little bit at a time. You don't try to do it all at once. I've got glue on all of this right here where I'm at right now, but I'm just putting a little extra. And then I'm going to move on down to about here somewhere, and then stop again. And this, believe it or not, probably doesn't look like it's that hard, but this is one of the hardest things there is on my hands. This and tuning instruments, those two things make my hands hurt worse than just about anything. So I may have to take a break here, get it so far and stop. I'll probably go a little past where I've got the glue, just so that I know it's tight, at least with the glue, and then I'll give my hands a little rest. I think that's adequate, because I think the glue's only to about right here. So that should work. I'll let that set about 10 or 15 minutes, give my hands a few minutes to rest, and I'll try to get the rest of this side done here. It's been about 15 minutes, so I'm going to spread this on a little further down the road here, assuming my hands will hold out.
My sweet Miranda of the mountain.
I'm going past where I've glued it again, just to help it kind of find its way a little bit. And anyway, right now I'm going to stop right there again and let it set for another 15 or 20 minutes. Again, letting my hands heal a little bit, and you know, it's glued to about right here, and then I think I can take it the rest of the way. I'm finding this is not a bad process by letting it set like that, but anyway, we'll see how it goes. Very difficult to get that type of binding in real tight because it's very stiff, very stiff. Well, my friends, once again, it's been quite a few days since I worked on this. We had a guest at the rental house that took up a couple of days. Then we had a 3-day weekend. So it's been 5 days or so since I worked on this. Well, the old hurry up and screw up and the fact that I can't just concentrate on one thing has bit me again. That is, you know, bending all this binding and everything, getting it ready. Then I started thinking about this, and I thought, well, I didn't even make pieces that will go down through here. You know, in other words, I don't have enough left over of this to use on these ends. And typically you do have lots of scrap left over and stuff, but I don't know what you want to call it. If you want to call it a budget job, it's not a budget job. I just wasn't thinking that about it. And the truth is, I just don't have any to put down on these ends and turn these ends like I was planning. So this morning I decided to tackle that. So I started making up some laminates that I can use here. Now I can use a solid piece on on the face because you're not going to see the edge. So I can just use a solid piece, and I just need to laminate the decorative edging here. And again, if you can't see that, it's you can see there's black, or there it's walnut. So there's like 3 strips of walnut, 2 strips of white, tiny strips, and they're all 20/1000ths of an inch thick. So that needs to be glued to the edge of this. So I can do that. Anyway, the bottom line is I started thinning that out to make those little decorative strips. They have to be very, very thin. They have to be 20/1000ths of an inch. Look at this. This is 2 of them together. See how flimsy that is? See how floppy it is? One of them by itself is really floppy. It's seriously paper thin. They're actually at 20/1000ths of an inch thick. I was able to do that on my thickness sander that I built, my homemade thickness sander. And the really rare thing about this is that I could sand it that thin without a backer board. And you know, most people would find that unheard of. Yeah, because you can't really do that on any other sander. But that's 20/1000ths of an inch thick, 2 times. One of them is that really hard maple, and you know, if you push on this as you're pushing it through the sander, it'll break this because it can't stand that compression stress. So you actually have to pull it through. You get it started through there, and then you got to get the hold of the end and just pull it on through, because if you kept pushing that, you'd break it for sure. It's crazy thin. You really have to feel this to know how thin it is. I mean, I'm sure I could bend it in a circle no problem. It's that thin. So anyway, now the problem is, how do you glue something that thin together? And oh my gosh, and how do you laminate it? Man, did you ever hear that it wasn't easy being me? It's truly not easy on this, I can tell you. And I'm not a laminate expert. I don't know all the tricks and stuff, and I probably am doing this the hard way. There's no doubt I probably am. But I'm just trying to get myself caught up to where I'm at here. And like that gives me 1 layer, but I actually need 3 of these brown and 2 of these whites. So yeah, there's all that. I'll do some thinking off camera here and figure it out. I'm sure I'll figure out something. I've given you kind of a wide view of what I'm doing here. I'm getting ready to glue up a bunch of very, very, very thin laminates. There's 5 pieces there, and you can see it's just as flimsy as it can be. Each piece is only 20/1000ths of an inch thick, crazy thin. So the trick is getting the glue on here, getting this all lined up, and getting it in the vacuum pressing systems bag. Vacuum Pressing Systems donated this to the channel, and it is a wonderful piece of equipment. If you ever need to glue up flat things, long things, you know, thin things that, you know, are difficult to clamp, anything that's really difficult to clamp, putting it in this bag takes care of all of that. It's wonderful. I'll show you how it works here. The tricky part for me on this whole thing is getting the glue on all these little tiny thin pieces on both sides and getting them kind of lined up. That's the hard part. I'm going to be using Tight Bond Ultimate 3, this Tight Bond 3 glue, Ultimate Wood Glue. This is waterproof and exterior grade glue. So that's what I want for this. It works really well because when you start bending this stuff, this stuff holds on really good. Even though these pieces, I'm not going to be bending these pieces. But anyway, without further ado, I'm going to start making my mess, and it's probably going to be a mess. I'm trying to put the really, really fine, thin line of glue on this because everything's really small and you can over glue it really quickly. I just don't want a ton of extra glue in here. I just want full coverage as best I can.
All I recall
positive that the vacuum bag will take care of the rest. That's, yeah, you would really be hard pressed to clamp this because it's so thin. There'd be almost no way to clamp it. I mean, you could get it done, but boy, it would be a difficult thing. And then with as much glue smear as I've got here, everything would be glued to everything, and even your clamps and everything. It's because you can't do this without making a little bit of a mess on something this tiny. And the mess doesn't come into play too much with the vacuum bag for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm going to wrap this stuff with cellophane here, or it's actually shrink wrap, and my able-bodied assistant will help me with that, I hope. And this is going to be tough to wrap because even as, you know, even with it all glued together, it's still crazy flimsy. I don't know how we're going to do this, but we'll figure it out. We're not on camera. I know we're not on camera, but we're trying to get this. Okay. There we go. Now we're starting to get cooking with gas. And yeah, I don't know if you can tear that or if you can't tear it, then yeah, there we go. Okay, so, you know, and you think, well, that looks kind of like a mess. Well, it is a little bit, but that thing don't care. It'll just suck these pieces together, and it will work really, really well. I'm sure of that. So here we go. We'll get back over here to the bag. I already have a plantum in here that has grooves in it. That lets air flow. There's been saw marks down the middle and saw marks across. And so I'll put this on the platen here and line it up on top of that. And I'm just taking one more little, make sure that it's all lined up. And it looks like it is pretty well. I think it's going to function for what I need to do. Now we just need to close up the bag. And there's a couple of ways to close up the bag. There's a couple of snaps here. They don't really do much other than hold the other pieces that are the actual clamp together. So we've got this little pole slide through here and plastic pipe, or whatever you want to refer to it as. That's about what it is, like a little piece of plastic pipe. And I've got it slid through the end of the bag, and now I'm going to force this black over that, and this will squeeze the plastic bag really tight. I think we got it. That was the hardest part of it, and that's really not that hard. It's just I got sore hands, that's all. Okay, so now I'll try to get the camera a little bit closer yet. You can, when I turn the vacuum on, and of course I don't even know if it's plugged in.
It is.
It is. Okay, we're plugged in. So I've got it on auto cycle, or I'm going to turn it on auto cycling here. And you can hear it starting to do the vacuum. You'll see the bag starting to move very lightly. You can start to see the air is coming out of the bag. And boy, now you can hear that thing laboring. It's got the air sucked out. And it feels really solid already. There's no way you could move it. And that it'll kick on like that a few times for the next 10 minutes or so. And then it doesn't kick on very much at all after that, because unless there's an air leak. And you know, it's just sucking the air out of everything, really is what it's doing. But that's got that all laminated together really well. I'm pretty sure that there won't be any problem with that. So we're going to have to let that set up probably overnight, because it takes a while for this stuff to cure in a vacuum like this. There's no air there, so I'm going to let this set for sure overnight. Well, while I'm making up all those other little binding pieces that I need, I'm turning my attention to this neck. And as you will recall, if you're a faithful follower of the channel, this is the neck that I accidentally made for the 12 string and then realized, hey, I'm building a 12 string. This is a 6-string neck, which, you know, I just did it out of habit. That's pure what it was. I've got a lot of work to do to this. This is not quite wide enough here, so I've got to glue on some wings. But I think before I do that, it's easy to hold it when it's square like this, and I think I'm going to hold it in the vise and work on shaping all this up and getting it at least rough shaped. And it's incredibly rough shaped right now, but let's see if we can get rid of some of that roughness, and it'll still be rough shaped. So here we go. I've decided to try to knock off some of this extra with the bandsaw. Typically I saw this line right down through here where the fretboard is going to go, but I've decided I'm going to make this easier on myself instead of doing that, because I'm always running into problems when I do it that way. I'm going to leave it wide, and I'm just going to go ahead and shape the back and shape the heel and that kind of thing. When I get a little closer or further along and I get the fingerboard on here and maybe even the binding, then I'll do the final shaping here up to the binding, and that'll be easier, really. It's a little awkward to do it that way. I kind of like doing it the other way. It's less awkward, but on the other hand, it'll be a finer job when I'm done this way. So let's see what I can do here. The main thing I want to do is I want to take off some of these corners, but I don't want to cut into this bottom line edge right here. This edge right here, or it's really the top, but it'll be down, so that's what I'm calling it, the bottom. So anyway, here we go.
In the fall, come springtime, we were married.
That's looking pretty good. I'm sure I could knock out some more with the saw, but I think I'll just do it by rough rasp. I feel more secure that way, and I don't have to worry about overdoing it too much. Well, I've got the very rough rasp here. It's very rough. Doesn't take very long with a rasp that rough to start getting a neck that looks like a neck. It's getting there. I'll zoom you in a little bit. You can see how much nicer it is up here than back here. It's pretty heavy back here yet.
She would be gone, my sweet Melinda of the mountain, I recall.
Well, there's what she looks like. Kind of roughed out there, and it is still pretty rough. Not terrible, just pretty rough. So the next step is to go to a smaller file. Now this is too small, but just give you an idea, you know, just going like this, it'll get rid of those big rough rasp marks. It gets rid of them pretty quickly, not 100% yet, but I need to go to slightly rougher than this. But anyway, that's what I'll do next is kind of smooth it out with another rasp. And I think then I'll probably move on to go ahead and get these wings glued on here. And then we'll let that set. Well, off camera, while that inlay stuff that I'm working on is drying, purfling, whatever you want to call that stuff, I glued on the 2 wings onto the side here, and I took my pattern and drew it on here. I barely needed any extra, but you know, I did need some. So anyway, now I'm going to just go over to the bandsaw and just cut that out, and over here on this end I may just knock that off with the sander, just turn it over and just bump that off until I get that matched up. It won't be any big deal. I'm not going to film it. I'm just going to saw that off and clean that up, and then we'll have at least this part of the peg head shaped.